What would you do if you found a blind bobcat kitten trembling in the dark, its cries piercing the silence of a misty mountain dawn? In the heart of the Smoky Mountains, one man faced that question, and what happened next turned his lonely world upside down, revealing a bond so fierce it defied the wild itself. Love, loss, and a mysterious visitor collide in a story that'll leave you wondering, can a creature without sight see straight into your soul? If you're moved by tales of the unexpected, hit that subscribe button and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Let's uncover the light in the darkness together. The Smoky Mountains wore autumn like a crown, their slopes ablaze with gold and scarlet, softened by a veil of morning mist. Samuel Winter sat on the porch of his cabin, a rough-hewn sanctuary he'd built with his own hands, cradling a mug of coffee as dawn spilled over the peaks. At 62, he'd traded the restless life of a nature photographer for this quiet perch among the pines, a retreat carved out after his wife slipped away to cancer 5 years ago. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of fallen leaves, and a hawk's cry echoed faintly in the distance. His thoughts drifted to her, to the laughter they'd shared, until a strange sound cut through the stillness. Not a bird, not the rustle of wind, but a frail, trembling wail rising from the forest's heart. He set the mug on the weathered railing, ears straining. It came again, weak yet persistent, tugging at a corner of his soul he'd long kept buried. Curiosity battled with a flicker of dread as he grabbed his flashlight and an old wool jacket, stepping off the porch into the woods. Leaves crunched beneath his boots, scattering like faded memories, and the beam of light danced over twisted roots and moss-draped stones. Then he saw it. A bobcat kitten, no bigger than his palm, shivering in a hollow of earth. Its eyes were clouded, crusted with infection, and one hind leg dangled uselessly. The sight hit him like a punch, stealing the breath from his lungs. He stood there, rooted to the spot, the forest whispering its ancient rules around him, survival or surrender. That's how it worked out here. He could almost hear his old mentor's gravelly voice, preaching respect for nature's way. But the kitten whimpered again, a sound so small it seemed to beg for a chance. Sam dropped to his knees, the damp soil soaking through his jeans. It was skin and bones, ribs jutting beneath matted fur, too weak to even bare its teeth. With a heavy sigh, he shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around the tiny creature, feeling its faint warmth seep into his hands. It didn't resist, just sank into the fabric as if it had already let go. Back at the cabin, he rummaged for a cardboard box and lined it with a soft towel, settling the kitten inside like it was something precious. The phone felt clumsy in his grip as he dialed around, voice low but urgent, until he reached Dr. Olivia Mendez, a wildlife vet known for coaxing life from the brink. "It's bad," she said, her words crackling through the line, steady but laced with caution. "Infection's deep, moving it far could finish it off." She agreed to meet him halfway, at a gas station nestled in the valley's shadow. Just then, gravel crunched outside. Michael, his younger brother, rolling up in his pickup for a visit they'd planned weeks ago. Sam stepped out, the box tucked under his arm, meeting Michael's puzzled grin. "Wildlife rescue now, huh?" Michael said, climbing out, his retired teacher practicality shining through. "Thought we were here to fish." Sam managed a crooked smile, words spilling out in fits and starts as he explained. They slid into the truck, the kitten's box wedged between them, and Michael took the wheel. "You sure about this, Sam?" he asked, glancing at the bundle. "Nature doesn't always play nice." Sam didn't answer right away. He looked down at those milky eyes, blind yet somehow searching, and felt a pull he couldn't shake. "Sometimes," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "the biggest choices don't come from your head. They come from somewhere deeper." They drove in silence, the road winding through hills cloaked in fog, the kitten's shallow breaths filling the cab. Sam traced the edge of the box with his thumb, wondering if he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Out there in the wild, life and death danced their old dance. But here, in his hands, was something else. a plea, a spark, a thread of hope he couldn't bring himself to let go. The gas station sat like a lonely outpost under the graying sky, its flickering neon sign buzzing faintly as Sam climbed out of Michael's truck, the cardboard box cradled in his arms. Dr. Olivia Mendez pulled up minutes later, her Jeep coated in a fine layer of mountain dust. She stepped out, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a quiet strength, her dark hair pulled back tight. Without a word, she gestured to the hood of her vehicle, and Sam set the box down, the kitten's shallow breaths barely audible over the hum of the highway. She peeled back the towel, her hands moving with a surgeon's grace, and let out a low hum. "Male, maybe 6 weeks," she said, voice steady. "Malnourished, dehydrated, eyes shot from infection." Sam leaned in, catching the weight of her pause. "Blind?" he asked. She nodded. "Too far gone. Might save his life, but not his sight." The words hung heavy between them, a verdict delivered in the cold afternoon air. Sam rubbed the back of his neck, glancing at Michael, who stood a few feet off, hands stuffed in his pockets. "Can he make it?" Sam pressed. Olivia's gaze softened, but she didn't sugarcoat it. "Odds are slim. Even then, he'd never survive out there." She offered to take him to a rehab center, but the thought of handing him over felt wrong, like abandoning a promise he hadn't meant to make. "I'll keep him," Sam said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Olivia raised an eyebrow, then shrugged. "All right. We'll set him up at your place. Long road ahead." Back at the cabin, Olivia turned Sam's kitchen into a makeshift clinic, her supplies spread across the table, syringes, bottles of formula, a tiny heating pad. She showed him how to feed the kitten every 3 hours, how to dab the crusted eyes with saline, how to watch for signs of collapse. Michael hovered nearby, shaking his head with a grin. "So much for that fishing trip. You've got yourself a Bobcat boot camp now." Sam barely heard him, his focus locked on the fragile life in his hands. He named the kitten Echo that first night, watching it tilt its head at every creak of the floorboards, every clink of a spoon, like it was mapping the world through sound alone. Those first 48 hours blurred into a haze of sleeplessness and hope. Sam woke to the chime of his alarm every 3 hours, stumbling to the kitchen in the dark, warming formula over a flickering stove. The kitten was a fighter, lapping at the syringe with a hunger that grew stronger each time. Michael took the day shifts, grumbling good-naturedly as he held the bottle, letting Sam collapse into a chair for a few stolen minutes of rest. On the second day, Olivia swung by, her boots leaving muddy prints on the porch. She checked Echo's vitals, her face unreadable until a faint smile broke through. "He's stabilizing," she said. "Breathing's better. He's tougher than he looks." But the truth came sharp and clear as she shone a light into those clouded eyes. "Right one's gone," she said, moving the beam. "Left might catch shadows, maybe light, but that's it. He's blind for good." Sam sank back against the counter, the weight of it settling in. A wild thing, robbed of the wild. "What now?" he asked. Olivia laid out the options like cards on a table. Rehab center, euthanasia, or a life in captivity with someone willing to fight for it. Sam didn't hesitate. "I'll get the permit," he said. "He stays with me." She nodded, scribbling notes. "It's a process. Paperwork, inspections. You're in deep now, Sam." Days bled into nights, and Echo began to change. Blindness didn't break him, it reshaped him. He learned the cabin's edges by the tap of his paws, the whisper of his whiskers against furniture. Sam started whistling, short, bright notes to call him to food or water, and Echo's ears would perk, his head swiveling with uncanny precision. One evening, as the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, Echo shuffled toward the sound of Sam's voice, bumping into a chair before correcting course. Michael watched, leaning against the wall. "Smarter than half the contractors I've met," he chuckled. Sam smiled, but it was the wonder of it that gripped him. How loss could carve out space for something new, something fierce and alive. That night, Sam sat by the box, the cabin bathed in the glow of a single lamp. Echo stirred, lifting his head at the soft whistle Sam let slip. He turned toward it, sightless eyes glinting, and for a moment Sam swore he saw a spark, a thread of trust weaving through the dark. It hit him then, quiet and sure. Sometimes losing one thing opens doors you never knew were there. 10 days after Echo's fragile life took root in the cabin, Sam stood at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of permit forms Dr. Olivia Mendez had dropped off. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows that danced across the room where Echo slept in his box, a tiny warrior stitched together by stubborn will. Sam's hands, rough from years of woodworking, trembled slightly as he signed his name. This wasn't just about saving a bobcat anymore, it was about tethering himself to something bigger. Michael sat across from him, nursing a beer, his brow furrowed. "You're really doing this, huh?" he said, voice low. "Raising a blind wild cat? That's a whole life shift, Sam." Sam looked up, meeting his brother's eyes. "Lost mine when she went," he said quietly. "Maybe this is how I find it again." The permit process was a tangle of red tape, inspections, wildlife courses, endless calls to state offices. But Sam threw himself into it. Olivia helped, faxing medical reports and vouching for Echo's condition, her steady voice a lifeline through the chaos. At night, Sam pored over books about bobcats, their habits, their fierce independence, scribbling notes in the margins. He sketched plans, too. A space for Echo, part indoors, part out. A sanctuary woven from wood and wire. Claire Thompson, his neighbor, showed up one afternoon, her silver hair catching the sunlight as she peered through the window at Echo. A nature writer with a gentle curiosity, she'd heard whispers of the Bobcat man and offered her help. Sam let her in, surprised by how easily her presence filled the quiet. Echo grew, not in leaps but in quiet victories. 12 weeks in, he was still smaller than a wild bobcat his age, his frame delicate beneath a thickening coat of fur. But his spirit bloomed. Mornings found him prowling the cabin's edges, afternoons dozing by the window, evenings curled beside Sam as he sanded a tabletop or flipped through a novel. He'd purr, a soft rumble Sam hadn't expected from a creature born to roam free, and sometimes he'd chirp, a sharp, hungry call, or growl low when he wanted attention. Sam marveled at it, how Echo balanced the wildness in his blood with a trust that felt almost human. The sanctuary took shape under Sam's hands, with Michael and Claire pitching in. They built an outdoor enclosure linked to the cabin by a tunnel, a special door Echo could nudge open with his nose. Sam carved pathways with textured planks guiding Echo's blind steps and hauled in rocks and logs to mimic the forest floor. A small stream trickled through, its gurgle a constant song for Echo to follow, and Sam rubbed cedar oil at key spots, giving him sense to map his world. The climbing structures were his pride. Smooth, sturdy perches tailored for a cat who couldn't see but could feel every inch. The day they finished, Echo ventured out, paused tentative at first, then bold, tracing the space with a confidence that stole Sam's breath. Word spread through the valley like wildfire. Locals started calling him the Bobcat guy, and soon kids and nature buffs trickled up the dirt road, peering through the trees for a glimpse of Echo. Sam bristled at first. He'd built this life to keep the world out. But their wide eyes softened him. Echo took it in stride, sprawling on a high perch where they could see him, blind but regal, his ears flicking at their gasps. Claire watched it unfold, her notebook filling with scribbles. "You should let me write about this," she said one evening, her voice warm over a shared pot of stew. "Not just Echo, you. What he's done for you." Michael, visiting again, laughed from the couch. "He's an ambassador now, Sam, a blind diplomat for the wild." That night, as the stars pierced the Smoky Mountain sky, Sam stood by the enclosure, watching Echo nudge the tunnel door open and step into his new world. The cat moved with purpose, paws sure on the path Sam had laid, a living testament to what they'd built together. Claire joined him, her shoulder brushing his, and said softly, "Sometimes purpose finds us in the strangest places, doesn't it?" Sam nodded, the weight of her words settling deep. Echo paused, tilting his head toward the rustle of leaves. and Sam felt it, a ripple of something new, a life reshaped by a blind kitten's trust. 14 months had passed since Echo stumbled into Sam's life, and the Smoky Mountains glowed with the fiery hues of another autumn. Sam woke early, the cabin quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire he'd stoked before dawn. Echo wasn't in his usual spot by the hearth, though. His small frame stood rigid near the window, ears twitching, whiskers trembling as if the air itself whispered secrets. Sam stepped onto the porch, coffee steaming in his hands, and followed Echo's blind gaze into the forest. Mist clung to the trees like a shroud, but through it he saw her, a wild bobcat, sleek and poised at the wood's edge. Her coat was a rich brown streaked with black, her golden eyes catching the faint light like twin flames. She moved with a grace that stole his breath, a living shadow of the wild Echo could never claim. He named her Willow that morning, watching her sway through the underbrush like the trees she mirrored. She didn't approach, just lingered at the tree line, her ears flicking each time Echo let out a soft chirp from his enclosure. Sam's heart quickened, part thrill, part worry, as he dialed Olivia. "Could be his scent," she said over the phone, her voice crackling with static. "Or his calls. She's curious, not hostile. Keep an eye out." Inside, Echo paced the edge of his outdoor space, his head tilting toward sounds he couldn't see, a low rumble in his throat that Sam hadn't heard before. It was longing, maybe, or recognition, a piece of the wild calling back to him. The next day, Willow crept closer, her paws silent on the fallen leaves. She stopped 10 yards from Echo's enclosure, crouching low, her eyes locked on the blind cat beyond the wire. Echo sensed her, his ears swiveled, his body tensed, and he shuffled to the fence, pressing his nose against it. Sam watched from the cabin window, breath fogging the glass, as they traded sounds. Willow's deep, throaty hum met Echo's sharp, curious gurr. She didn't lunge or snarl, just stretched out on the ground, her tail flicking lazily, like she was sizing him up. Echo mirrored her, lying down on his side of the divide, and for a moment they were two halves of a broken whole, tethered by something Sam couldn't name. Weeks slipped by, and Willow became a fixture, a wild guest who arrived with the dawn or dusk, her presence a quiet rhythm in their lives. Sam and Claire rigged a safe zone along the enclosure's edge, a double layer of mesh where Echo could feel her near without risk. Echo waited for her now, his head lifting at the faintest snap of a twig, his chirps growing eager. Willow took to leaving gifts, twigs, a tuft of feathers, piled near the fence like offerings from a world he'd never roamed. Sam watched them one evening, the sun dipping low, painting the mountains in shades of amber. Echo stretched toward her scent, and Willow pressed her flank against the wire, a silent pact forming in the twilight. Claire stood beside him, her notebook forgotten, her voice soft. "She's not here to take him back," she said. "She's here because he's here." Sam nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in his bones. Echo wasn't just a survivor, he was a bridge, pulling the wild close in ways Sam hadn't dreamed possible. The community buzzed louder now, folks trekking up the hill to see the blind bobcat and his mysterious friend. Sam didn't mind anymore. Their wonder mirrored his own. Michael, back for a weekend, clapped him on the shoulder. "You've got a pair of ambassadors now. Blind or not, they're rewriting the rules." One night, under a sky thick with stars, Sam stepped outside, the chill biting his skin. Echo lay near the fence, Willow sprawled just beyond it, their silhouettes framed by the moon's pale glow. They faced the same direction, as if sharing a secret only the night could hold. Sam's chest tightened, a swell of awe and ache he couldn't shake. These two, one tamed by loss, one free as the wind, had found each other across a divide no one could cross. He thought of his wife then, her gentle laugh, and wondered if she'd sent them both to him, threads of light woven through his darkness. In that quiet, he felt it. Love didn't need eyes to see. It only needed a heartbeat to find its way. Winter draped the Smoky Mountains in a blanket of snow, the cabin a warm glow against the endless white. Sam, now 63, felt the seasons turning in his bones, but the ache of solitude that once gnawed at him had faded. Echo thrived in his sanctuary, a blind king of his small domain, while Willow's wild shadow came and went like the wind. Claire had woven herself into their days too, her laughter filling the spaces Sam hadn't known were empty. He'd sit with him by the fire, her silver hair catching the light, scribbling notes about Echo or reading aloud from her latest draft. Michael called from town, his voice crackling through the line. "You got a whole crew up there now, huh? Bobcats and a writer. Who'd have thought?" Sam chuckled, but the truth lingered. He wasn't alone anymore. Claire's presence grew deeper, a quiet bloom Sam hadn't expected. They'd talk late into the night, snow piling against the windows, sharing stories of loss, her husband gone in a crash, his wife taken by illness, and the slow healing that followed. One evening, as flakes swirled outside, she reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his calloused skin. They stood at the window, watching Echo nudge his tunnel door open, Willow's silhouette flickering at the forest's edge. The moment held them, fragile and perfect, and Sam felt something shift. A spark rekindled in the ashes of his heart. Her smile lit the room, softer than the fire, and he knew then that love could find him again, threading through the dark like a river finding its course. Echo's story rippled beyond the mountains that spring. Claire's article hit a national magazine, her words painting him as more than a blind bobcat, a symbol of grit and grace. Calls poured in, then a film crew, their boots crunching up the snowy path. Sam hesitated, but Claire's steady gaze convinced him. "It's not about us," she said. "It's about what he means." They filmed Echo scaling his perches, Willow watching from the trees, and Sam agreed, as long as the heart of it stayed true. Echo, nearly 2 now, carried a quiet majesty, his sightless eyes glinting with a wisdom Sam couldn't fathom. Willow drifted in and out, a free spirit tied to them by some unspoken bond, her gifts of twigs piling up like tokens of a friendship no one could explain. Sam took up his camera again, the old Nikon a familiar weight in his hands. He captured Echo's tilted head, Willow's golden stare, the way the light broke through the pines. He started a journal too, pages filled with sketches and thoughts, a legacy for whoever came after, a map of the strange, beautiful road he'd walked with a blind kitten. The valley buzzed with their tale, kids pressing noses to car windows, locals nodding at him in the gas station like he'd done something heroic. He hadn't, not really. Echo had saved him, not the other way around, and Willow had sealed it, pulling him back to the wild he'd once chased through a lens. One frigid night, the snow fell thick and silent, cloaking the world in stillness. Sam stepped onto the porch, Claire beside him, her breath clouding the air. Echo lay in his enclosure, a dark shape against the white, while Willow stretched out just beyond the fence, her eyes glinting in the dark. Sam lit a lantern, its golden glow spilling over the snow, weaving a circle of warmth around them all. The wind sighed through the trees and Echo let out a long, low call, a sound that rolled across the night like a thank you. From the shadows, Willow answered, her voice a soft echo of his, a harmony born of 2 worlds touching. Claire leaned into him, her shoulder brushing his, and whispered, "We didn't save them, you know. They saved us." Sam turned to her, the lantern light catching the lines of her face, and nodded. He thought of his wife, her gentle hands, and felt her somewhere in this moment, guiding him to this cabin, this cat, this woman. The camera hung around his neck and he lifted it, framing the scene. Echo and Willow, the snow, the light, snapping a shot that held it all. "Maybe darkness isn't the enemy," he said, voice rough with wonder. "Maybe it's just where the light learns what it's worth." The lantern flickered, casting their shadows long and soft, and Sam felt the weight of it settle, a life remade, not by sight, but by the steady beat of hearts that refused to let go.